Okay, we're on.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. My name is Heather Keeler, candidate running in House 4A here in Moorhead. I'm really excited about this Tuesday's conversation. I'm partnering with another awesome candidate and then some local activists who are a part of Moms Demand Action. So you can't see it right now, but we all have our shirts on. And the mission behind this is really to end gun violence. I'm going to ask everybody to share a little bit about themselves, and then we'll just get into some basic conversations. If along the way anybody has questions that are here joining us on Zoom, you can put them in the chat or the question and answer. We're also on Facebook. We're not really monitoring those questions as well as we should be, just because of manpower. But if you want, you can sure jump on our Zoom link and ask some questions. I want to start with Martha Wheeler. I want to tell a little story just because, as many of you know, I decided to run at 3:30 the day of the caucus, which was the end of February. And right away, one of the very first people in my community that I didn't know already that I reached out to was Martha. We met and we talked a lot about what Moms Demand Action does. And I quickly fell in love with this mission and not only fell in love with it, but became very passionate about being a voice for this. As a mom, I'm raising all boys in a community and in a world that isn't always so kind to them. But also in my life, I am a suicide survivor, and I like to call myself a domestic abuse warrior. Those are pieces of my life that I've overcome and I've survived. And I constantly go back and think that had guns been a part of those situations, my outcome could be very, very different. And it becomes really personal to me. And so Martha and I have had really in-depth conversations. She's an amazing support. She's always there to help in the campaign, but also when I have questions. And she brings me cookies every now and then, which just means she's fantastic all around. Next, I want to talk a little bit about another candidate. One of the things that I strongly believe in is that we don't do things alone. We never are going to create the bigger change alone. And it's collaboration that's the key. One thing is we collaborate with our community members like Martha, but the other thing is that I've really spent time in my campaign collaborating with other candidates who I really believe we align in multiple different areas. Liz Boldon is a candidate for House 25B up in Rochester area. And I've just loved listening to her. I've crossed paths with her many times. And every time I'm like, that's exactly how I feel. That's exactly what I want to do. And so it's like we've kind of become friends from a distance in this mission to really serve together and make change. And then I'm actually going to let Liz, if you want to introduce Alisha, because she's your community activist.
Yes, so Alisha Eiken, who I have known for years, but I think initially we met through Moms Demand, is fabulous for many reasons, but one of which is her passion and leadership with Moms Demand Action. So thank you to Alisha for joining the conversation as well.
So I'm going to flip it back over. Liz, do you want to tell us a little bit about you, about your district, about why you chose to run, and specifically how long you've been a part of this organization and some of the work that you've done here?
Yes, happy to. So thank you for that great opening and intro. So yes, my name is Liz Boldon. I am running for Minnesota House here in 25B, which is Rochester. It's about the northern third of Rochester. And so I am not a career politician. This is my first time running for office. And if you had asked me a year ago if I would be running for office, I would have laughed at you and said, nope. I definitely have been involved for years in my community with campaigns and with some organizing and activism work. But I am very much an introvert, and so was okay with being sort of behind the scenes with things until I wasn't. And so in my daytime work is that I'm a nurse and an educator. And more importantly, I'm a mom to 3 kiddos. I have a daughter who is 25 and lives in the Twin Cities, and then 2 teenage boys at home. One just graduated in the spring and one now is just a junior. And so they are the reason essentially that I'm doing this. I need to be able to look them in the eye and tell them that I have done everything I could possibly do to make the world and Minnesota a better place for them. And so I am running to do that work. I strongly believe that we need folks in office making decisions with the best interest of all Minnesotans in mind. We have structures and policies that work really well for some people and not at all for other people. And it should not be that way. And we can do better than that. I think we need to have leaders making decisions based on science and evidence and data. And that sort of is the world I live in as a nurse. And I'm not seeing enough of that in our government. And so there came a point where, as I said, I've been involved in my community and with campaigns in the past and with organizing and sort of activism in the community and with Moms Demand Action. And I'll come back to that for some time. But there really came a point when this seat came open. And so this is an open seat right now. Was formerly held by Dwayne Sauk, and he's retiring. So that leaves it an open seat. And with that, I just feel like this selection is too important. There's too much at stake. Lives are literally at stake. It's too important for me to not stand up and run for what I believe in and the work that I want to do. And part of that is ending gun violence. And so I have been involved with Moms Demand Action for a few years. It started out, as I said, I think I met Alisha through an event and then just got more involved with it, knowing that it's a fantastic group that is actually making change. Because I am a doer, I'm about action, and talk is cheap. Like I want action, and Moms is getting action. Like they are getting stuff done. And that is getting done right now, has been getting done in the Minnesota House. It is not getting done in the Minnesota Senate. So let me just put in a plug for flipping the Minnesota Senate so we can actually get things done. But that is part of the work that I want to do. And I'm grateful for all the amazing moms. I have built so many strong relationships with amazing women, mothers and others, through doing this work. It's tough and it's difficult and there's super challenging situations. And I thank you, Heather, for sharing that little, that piece about you of being a survivor. That's really tough, but there's amazing people doing this work. And so that's what I want to get done. So thank you for the opportunity to chat about this.
See what I mean? Every time she talks, I'm like, yes, I agree. Yes, I agree. It's interesting because I share those pieces of me in spaces that I feel like, like you mentioned, we need people who are actually making decisions that are inclusive and that are for us. And I think that it's interesting because I agree with you. I'm not a groomed politician by any means. I'm a community activist and I just stand up for those pieces that I feel like are missing a lot. But I've kind of gotten to the point where I feel like there's been a lot of pieces in my life that I've been really embarrassed about. And it's hard to speak up about that. Like it's really hard to talk about times in your life when suicide was an option for you, or that why didn't you leave these really abusive situations? But I use it in my story as an example of like leaders like us have experienced life in very different ways. And so our voice is just coming from a different angle. It's not better, it's just different. And inclusive decision-making, I feel really means that we have these different stories at the table. So I've become a little bit more comfortable, sharing that, especially when it comes to ending gun violence, because there's been a lot of those pivotal points in my life that guns have played a part in safety and protection, not only from others, but also from myself. And we need to keep that in mind. So I want to roll over. So Liz, thank you so much for the work that you do. Also, it's not really a topic of this, but the work that you do in our healthcare system is just so needed right now. And I don't think that other candidates get enough credit for the fact that we're living outside lives other than just being candidates. And you're just doing so much to help educate other people in the healthcare system. And so your community is really, really lucky to have you. And I can't wait for the opportunity for hopefully us to serve together. I'm going to move over, and Martha, I want you to tell us a little bit about you and who you are in our community. And Martha, talk about what really sparked you to get involved in Moms Demand Action and some of the things that you've participated in, not only in our community, but also on the state level.
Hi, I am a full-time grandma, taking care of two little boys with my husband every day, and incredibly fortunate to do that. I am a retired music educator, and I've been involved in Moms Demand Action for about 2.5 years. The the event that pushed me into jumping in was the shooting in Parkland. And I have learned so much since then, which I think is really typical of a lot of people like me who were pushed into taking action because of a very public tragedy, like one of the mass shootings. But the truth is, I have learned so much. The mass shootings are just the tip of the iceberg. They're like 1% of gun violence in America. But I decided I had to do something because I kept waiting. I kept waiting for somebody to do something, thinking surely somebody will solve this problem. And the problem just has gone on and on and on and gotten to ridiculous proportions, to find out that Americans are 25 times more likely to die by homicide, by gun homicide, than people in any other developed nations in the world. To learn that gun violence is the second leading cause of death for American children. To learn that gun violence is the leading cause of death for Black American children. To learn that 100 Americans a day die by gun violence, and that 7 of those people are children. It's just horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying to see people carrying guns in houses of legislation in order to intimidate whoever it is they're trying to intimidate, whether it's gun prevention activists or legislators. These are just horrifying things to me. I am particularly interested in Be Smart. I love Be Smart, which is an educational program started by Moms Demand Action to get information out to all people who work with children, be they parents, educators, and grandparents, anybody who is involved with children, to help to let them know that safe gun storage is a very, very important issue. Be Smart is SMART is an acronym. S stands for secure guns in your homes and vehicles, model responsible behavior, ask about guns in other homes that your child visits, recognize the role of guns in suicide, and tell your peers to be smart. It's a very simple, very effective program. It's something that information that we want to get out to people, as many people as we can, because I think that I was not alone in being a person that did not realize that 4.6 million children live in a home with an unlocked, loaded gun, and that's very dangerous. Did I answer your question, Heather?
Yeah, I think that's really good. We'll move over to Alisha if you want to do kind of the same thing. Just tell us a little bit about you, why you got involved, and some of the things that you're working on.
Sure. I feel like you, Heather, as you all are talking, I'm like, yes, agree, yes. I got involved with Moms Demand Action, like Martha, after the Parkland shooting. It motivated me to go to my first meeting. I have 2 young boys. They're now in 1st and 3rd grade, but at the time, my oldest was just starting kindergarten. And it was the first time watching that unfold on the news that I realized that my kindergartner would be going through an active shooter drill. And that was too much. So I went to my first meeting and then, just stayed involved because exactly like Martha said, the more you learn about our gun violence problem, and specifically our gun violence problem in Minnesota, you realize that it's maybe a different problem than it is in other parts of the country, especially in like Liz's and Heather's districts. It's probably primarily gun suicide. And Heather, thank you so much for sharing your story, because I think that's really, really important to talk about. And it's super brave of you to share it. It brought tears to my eyes. I think, I think the gun suicide, it's the main cause of gun violence here in Olmsted County. And it doesn't get talked about enough. Like, we don't see those numbers in the newspaper. They're not headlines, nor should they be, but it's such a hidden crisis that I think it's really problematic. And I think now during the pandemic, we're even seeing teenage gun suicide numbers increase. And that's especially heartbreaking. I'm really glad Martha brought up the Be Smart program, because I think it's more important now than ever to get that message out. I think in our area, we do a good job with gun safety training in terms of like, this is how you use a long gun. This is how, don't point it only at the ground or in the air, things like that. But what we don't talk about is how the presence of a gun is literally the difference between life and death when someone's in crisis. And how teenagers are so labile and impulsive. And so the presence of that gun, they don't actually quite often realize the finality of their actions. And because guns are very common here, I think it's especially important to normalize talking about that. And I also love that it talks about how to ask about guns just on a regular play date, which again, is a really important piece that gets missed in any other gun safety curriculum I've ever seen. So I think it's a really great program. And I just want to put a plug in for it. We can offer it if anyone watching has a church group or a club or anything, we can offer that program online. And I think I think now is a crucial time to get that message out. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out to your local Moms Demand Action, or honestly, we could do it from anywhere. Now we could do it online. We'd love to give that presentation. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So a couple of things about the Be Smart. I don't even remember, Martha. It maybe was like 2 months ago, 3 months ago. I feel like I'm living in this weird time warp that I feel like February was about 3 years ago. And I think it was really only about 6 or 7 months ago. But I actually attended, it was an online conversation, a presentation. And it was amazing to me how some of these concepts are very simple and common knowledge, but yet you just need a little bit of encouragement, to really engage in the conversation and find other people who are around you having these conversations. And the other thing that I want to bring up that's been really interesting as I have conversations, and Liz, I don't know if it comes up in your community, when we're calling people, but is the secure piece of gun ownership is very bipartisan. This is one of those areas that is not like blue or red. I think everybody wants to know and understand gun safety. And I think that we need to be very clear that the mission that we have is not like gun control or take your guns. That's not where we're at. I have people in my family who love to hunt, and that's not, necessarily what we're trying to do. We just want this conversation to gear towards more safety and really ending those pieces that end lives that are tragic and that really could have different stories. And so that's just one piece that I feel like we really need to talk about, is that these conversations are not necessarily political inside, because we were just talking about how, especially in rural Minnesota, suicides are very common. And again, that's not a partisan issue. That's something that we all deal with. We're in a pandemic. We're in a space where, everybody's mental health is maybe being challenged a little bit right now. And we are in a world where healthcare, it's really hard to get those mental health supports. And so I would second the plug, that if there's anybody out there who has, even if they're just small groups, or even if it's just a couple of, your friends or neighbors that want to you don't want to do anything major, but maybe you're just interested in learning a little bit more. It is just a really good conversation. I think anybody who has kids should really talk about it. I also think that it's a good conversation to start. I have high schoolers, and I never asked when they went over to friends' houses. It's not necessarily do you have guns in your house, but are they secure and safe, so that if my kids are over there playing or messing around, like that it's not just easy access for an accident to happen. I also have a 4-year-old, and I think we all know that they're just curious about everything. And so the one thing I liked about the Be Smart conversation that I was a part of is we even did a little bit of like role playing in it. And like, how would you bring that up? Because how do you bring that up if you've been sending your kid to a house for years and now all of a sudden you're like, I should probably know that. I should ask that question. Yeah, Liz, what do you want to add on it, just as far as some of the conversations and some of those spaces that you have in your community?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. In the conversations I'm having with folks, it is absolutely not a partisan issue that responsible gun owners want folks to be safe with guns, that it's about safety. And you're right. And our current times of, I think everyone's stress level is probably elevated right now. We're living through a worldwide pandemic. Many of us, have been confined, more than we're used to, economic stressors. There's a variety of reasons why people are rightfully stressed right now. Add on top of that, the difficulty in some areas with receiving mental health care or adequate mental health care. Yes, I absolutely am finding that folks, it's not a partisan issue. Folks want people to be safe with guns, and that it isn't about, as you said, it's not, there's in our Rochester chapter, there's many gun owners that attend meetings. And it isn't about, snatching everybody's guns. It's about how do we be safe? And there's absolutely things we can do to save lives and keep more people safe. And the other thing I will just add, and I think, Alisha, maybe you would want to touch on this too, is something that resonated with me with the Be Smart program is one, the asking other parents about, how do you have that conversation and the role playing that conversation. My kids are teenagers now. And when they were little, like it didn't occur to me once to, ask that question, and it definitely should have. I want to keep them safe. And so practicing how to have that conversation, I think was really important. And the other thing, last thing I'll just add is, again, I'm going to go back to that kind of science and data that's the other thing I appreciate about the Be Smart program is that they kind of bring in some of that research. I mean, we know, teenagers' brains are not done forming. And so the research tells us, for teenagers and I think all folks, that when they are in a moment of crisis and contemplating suicide, we know if they have access to a gun at that point, it is much more likely that they will not survive. And the data and the research of little ones with, teaching them, telling them, don't touch a gun, it makes no difference. It does not help the situation. And so having that research and data behind it, I think is really helpful and important too.
Mm-hmm. There's a line that one of our volunteers who's a pediatrician always says, you can't, the research shows you can't train the curiosity out of a child. So it doesn't matter really, they act the same whether they've been through the training or not. I do see a question. Someone asked if we could do an example of the role play. Martha, do you want to do that with me real quick? So we'll pretend my kid's going to go to Martha's house to play. Okay. Hey, Martha, my son has severe food allergies, so I'll send snacks with, and are you comfortable giving him epinephrine if I show that to you before we come?
Oh yeah, I would really like some pointers on how to do that, but I'd be very happy to do that.
Okay, great. And then I'll also send his booster. And then lastly, do you have any firearms in your home? And if you do, are they secured safe? Are they stored securely and separate from the ammunition?
Gosh, I hadn't really thought about that. My husband keeps, this isn't real.
Yeah.
My husband keeps a gun up high in our bedroom closet, and it's not locked up. I hadn't really thought about that before.
So I just went to this class and they talked about how it's really important to keep everything secure and locked away from kids. So do you have a way you can lock the gun and the ammunition? Otherwise, I'd be happy to have the kids come play at my house today.
You know what? Let's do that. Let's have the kids at your house today And I will talk to David about getting a lock for the gun and making sure that we have stored the gun and the ammunition separately.
Great.
Thanks for
Thanks,
bringing that
Martha.
up.
Yeah.
I
Thanks.
thought about it.
I know. So I will say, my family are gun owners, and we were not storing our ammunition separately from our firearms until I took this class. So even though I'd been a mom's volunteer for probably over a year, like everything was locked, but it really should be locked separately. So, you know, it's important. It's really important information. And another way I've done on play dates is texting the mom. Sometimes it's a little more comfortable if you just like, so I'll send snacks with, don't feed him any of your food. P.S. Like, where are your guns? How many are there? I mean, depending on where he's going, I might ask, what kind of firearms do you have? But that's because we live in a rural area.
Have you gotten like really bad reactions from anybody in those conversations?
No, never. And even if I did, like, that's good information. I wouldn't feel safe sending him there then. So either way, I feel like it's good information.
And one of the other things about Be Smart that is really important is that it puts the responsibility for keeping the children safe on adults. We don't expect kids, like you were saying, Liz, telling kids not to touch guns. That might happen, that very likely might not happen. So the responsibility is on the adults.
Okay, so I want to move kind of to how do we create this change, and why is this change so important? Like, these programs are great, and it's a great plug, and I again will just continue to say, like, learn more. I feel like learning is a lifelong opportunity in many areas. But let's talk about some of the bills and the legislative piece of this, and where Liz and I hope that we can be a voice and support and partnership. You know, and this is one of the things that Martha and I really have walked through together, is some conversations about where the bills are at, what's the language in the bills. And again, this is where, my life lens is different than other people's, and there's still some concern in just some of the areas that maybe we just need to think a little bit more about. But the one thing that, let's talk about, Alisha, I'll head it over to you, but let's talk about background checks. And, we talk about, for me, the biggest area is, if you have a history of domestic violence, that should be something that shows up. If you have severe mental health, and not that like all mental health isn't, needs to be taken into consideration, but I think there's a level that needs to be understood, that like, are you mentally in the right mind to be able to make good decisions if you're a gun owner? So do you want to talk a little bit about that and where we are in the state of Minnesota?
Yes, I'd love to. Do you want me to talk about background checks at baseline too, or just kind of where we're at? Okay. So currently, the current legislation in Minnesota requires federally licensed dealers it requires a federal background check with every single gun sale. But that is not a requirement for private sellers. So if the majority of your income isn't from gun sales, like, I could go and sell a gun to my neighbor with no background check, and not even, and we know that you never really know someone. So like, even if my neighbor is a good guy, like, I don't know what their history is or what happens in their house behind closed doors or whatever, right? So what we're trying to get done in Minnesota is just an extension of the current law so every single sale would require a background check. And it is one of the only bills that I truly hear over and over again. Like, every single poll shows vast support from both Republicans and Democrats and from gun owners. Like, everybody thinks this is a good idea, except for our state senators. So we're going to get new senators, and then we'll get this passed. But anyways, it did pass in the House. The last two sessions, it passed in the House. And I can't talk about what happened to the Senate because I'll get angry. But basically, political shenanigans happened, and I don't think it even was heard in the last session. But it's proven to save lives in the states that background checks have been enacted in. It's proven to save lives, and it's just common sense, right? Like, will one bill cure gun violence? No, but like this is a basic legislative piece that we need to have, and then we can kind of start building on.
Can I interrupt for just a second?
Yes,
and just say that, because we sometimes hear that argument, right? Of, well, it's not going to fix the problem, so why would we do that?
Yeah.
The argument that one thing is not going to fix the entire problem is ridiculous. We don't do things because it's not going to, one thing is going to solve the whole problem. I mean, if you carry that over into every other issue, I mean, just it makes no sense. So I'm sorry, I just had to chime in with that.
I'm glad you said that, because I think it's true. Like it's just a very basic safety standard, and it doesn't infringe on anyone's rights. And any responsible gun owner is for background checks. So I'm really optimistic, and I think we all are, that this is something we will get passed in the near future, because it's really a no-brainer. And we just need to get our legislators to start to catch up with like what the voters actually want, because the vast majority, like it's like 90% support background checks. I mean, find me one other topic or bill that 90% of Minnesotans can support, right? Yeah.
And unfortunately, we have a very powerful gun lobby that is probably the main reason that our senators are not voting for background checks, because the gun lobby is controlling this issue and threatening to take money away from or give a bad grade to a senator that is not, that is willing to support background checks for all gun sales. And it's so important because 22% of gun sales are not through a licensed dealer. So that means 22% of gun purchases are unchecked. And that could be anybody buying those guns.
I think in Minnesota alone in 2018, there were it was like 22 or 26,000 ads on, I'm not going to say the name of the website, but the website where you can go to buy guns without a background check. There were over 20,000 ads just in Minnesota in that year. So guns that you could just, so criminals don't need to steal them. Like they can get them so easily legally. Like that's insane, So I think it's a no-brainer. Like there really is no good reason. The other important piece that because a lot of people, like, I grew up in rural Minnesota, and so people are like, oh, it's such a pain to, you have to drive so far. But over like 97% or something of Minnesotans live within 10 miles of a federally licensed seller or a place where they could get a background check. So, it's not that really that big of an inconvenience. And if you talk to any most responsible gun owners just do it anyways, even if they're having a private sale, because they, it's kind of like to protect yourself a little bit too. But it should be mandatory. It should absolutely be mandatory.
And also, I think that one of the pieces that Martha, you talked to me about, if you want to talk a little bit more about it, was the gun show loophole. And Martha, do you want to talk a little bit about that and kind of the areas of concern that we see there?
Well, that's what I'm talking about. It's typically called the gun show loophole, but it also covers internet sales or just sales from the guy down the road. And it's really interesting. I was doing some research today about what do you need to do to buy a gun in Minnesota, and the truth is not much. I mean, what do you need to show? What do you need to prove? You need a permit to purchase a handgun or an assault rifle from a licensed dealer. And you need to be 21 if you purchase the gun from a licensed dealer, but you can be 18 years old and purchase an assault rifle from a licensed dealer. You need to pass a federal background check, but there's no mandatory waiting period in Minnesota. I did not realize that. And an 18-year-old can buy an assault style weapon with no background check from a private seller. And a 14-year-old can buy a shotgun without parental permission from a private seller. So it's just like, there's no regulation. I mean, there's so little regulation. You have to do a lot more to be able to drive an automobile than to purchase a gun.
Yeah, I think that all of that is just like that, because then my brain goes to, and I know we have an hour and we're almost up of time, and I feel like this conversation, all of my talking Tuesdays, I feel like a little bit after 6:30, we just get on a roll, and then it's like we could just go on for hours. But it's really interesting to me too, like, how do you become a licensed dealer, and what's the process to do that, and what's the obligation to make sure that they're, like when you're a teacher, you have to kind of go back every time and follow these standards to relicense. When you're a nurse, you have to do that. When you're a hairdresser, you have to do that. Like, what do our licensed dealers have to do to make sure that they're following suit to be part of the commitment in safe gun ownership? I mean, it's not really maybe something we have to talk about here, but it's one of those questions that maybe it's worth digging into a little bit more. Okay, so let's move on because, just for the sake of time, I want to talk a little bit about, both of you mentioned the reason that you got involved with Moms Demand Action was because of a school shooting incident. And it's really sad to me that, like, we're highlighting the fact that we haven't had any mass shootings, in the last so many months, but we're also in a pandemic and we were distance learning. And so that's not really a statistic that we should be like we're moving in a right direction, because I don't really believe that we are. But, one of the things as a mom, and I actually used to work in the school district as a liaison, was the fact that if we're going to put our kids through active shooter drills, and just the fear that puts in our kids, but also, like, we have a lot of new Americans who have come from very war zone like communities, and just the trauma that reignites for people, that if like our communities are really comfortable with just continuously doing that with our kids, at what point is our community going to be okay with then pushing these safer gun owner kind of standards? And so do either of you want to just kind of touch base a little bit more on that, or any of you, I guess, on kind of that mind frame? Because for me as a mom, I have this shirt, but then I also have this shirt that says, like, you messed with the wrong mom, because, like, I do not want to be part of an after story. Like, I want to be part of the prevention story. So Liz, do you want to kind of touch on that quick? And then we'll go over to Alisha.
Yeah, I think we've had some conversation about this and touch base with our sort of local, superintendent and school officials here in Rochester to talk about, is that happening here and what does that look like? And thankfully, it is not at this time. And again, I'm going to go back to science and data and evidence. There's no data or evidence that shows that is beneficial. In fact, the opposite. There is evidence to show that it is harmful and traumatic, and for the reasons that you just described, that for kids to be in that environment, and yes, certainly for those who have had trauma in the past, to reignite that is just wrong, and we should not be doing that.
Yeah, the only thing I have to add is we had a town hall in Rochester on gun violence prevention, and Disable, the director of our diversity council, brought up this point that just really stuck with me. She talked about how active shooter drills are so different than anything else for kids, because they're imagining one of their friends and one of their peers coming in and doing this. And that's a very different thing to wrap your head around, and how that sticks with kids then throughout their years in school. And it's, Liz is exactly right. The science is showing that it's traumatic, and there's, now it's just become a lot of the drills and things like that have just become a moneymaker for companies that are kind of preying on it, I feel like.
That's a really good point. I mean, it's, again, one of those obvious points, but it's a very, just your mind frame of it, that what are we adding and what seeds are we planting of fear in our kids? And what does that kind of do long term? Well, okay, we'll switch over to the other thing that Moms Demand Action has really been working on is the red flag laws. This is an area that I'm going to be really honest, and maybe, it's a little bit challenging sometimes to speak up, that I am in favor of the idea of this law very much, because I agree that when there's spaces, like I said, self-harm. As a liaison, I've lost students to suicide, and we knew that, and we tried so hard to be very mindful of that if there was this next level of community support, that we could intervene when it comes to eliminating guns out of houses, maybe before kids are home from school, or things like that. And also domestic abuse. And especially right now in the pandemic, if we look at the numbers, and it's the one thing that I constantly think about because I've been there, and I can only imagine what had a pandemic hit in those times of my life, it would have been awful. And it's hard enough to leave situations, and it's hard enough to continue to stay safe. And it's a really big mind game. And so the red flag law, I agree with that. There needs to be this community outside support to really help eliminate guns from situations that could be harmful to self or to other community members. The one area, and Martha and I have talked about this a little bit, is the component, and especially now, I think it's fair that our conversations were in February. A lot has happened there. A lot has come to light in what's been always happening, but just the big partnership that we're putting on law enforcement to be the ones to kind of take and hold on to those guns, that like, do we maybe need to expand it and look at the fact that maybe we need to look at other community partnerships? Is there an extra layer of rape and abuse crisis center? Is there an extra layer of our suicide prevention levels that really need to be written into this so that it's more extensive? Because I think the space that some people get really hesitant is we see the relationship between law enforcement and our underrepresented populations. And if we open up one more piece that law enforcement can intervene and say, you're a threat, because somebody feels this way, are we opening the doors for more discrimination? And I think that's just one of those side pieces that would be, I'd be really interested to hear kind of each of your takes on that. I want to be very clear that doesn't mean I don't support this effort. I just think maybe we need to layer it up and look at those community collaboration so that we're actually helping we're not just taking a gun away from the situation, we're helping with the fact that we have a teen who's considering self-harm, that we have domestic abuse, or sexual assault happening in our community, that we're really partnering with those community organizations to help the situations rather than just stop the immediate action. So Martha, what do you think? We've kind of talked about this before. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I have a couple of responses to what you're talking about tonight. And one is, I think that's exactly why we need to have somebody like you in the legislature, because we need somebody with your perspective, and we need somebody who is going to listen to all voices and bring them together. And I think that's a skill that you have. I think we need more perspectives in the legislature. One of the things that I have always heard about the effectiveness of red flag laws is that there is always due process involved, and that it's usually, I think the way that Minnesota wrote it, it was supposed to be red flag. A person can be red flagged because, or they can have their gun taken by law enforcement because people were worried about wives having issues during a divorce or something like that. But there has to be really good due process through the courts. And the first, there's like 14 days where a gun can be taken from somebody who is in danger of harming themselves or others. And there has to be a very thorough process for it to go any farther than that. But again, I think that's exactly why we need a greater variety of people representing us in the legislature.
Alisha, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think, like it's kind of embarrassing because as a white woman, I didn't even think about that till probably the last few months. And it's obvious, right? Like there's, and until we fix the systemic problem, honestly, any piece of legislation could potentially have harmful effects. I think this one particularly, I agree with you, Heather. I think it's important to look at every piece of legislation carefully and consider all of the consequences. Can it be used as a penalty? And that's not the intention of this. And so I think it's really important to talk about that. And I totally agree with Martha that like that is exactly why we need people that think like this and think about everybody to be making our laws, because that's really problematic if we're doing things that potentially are harmful to people that we're trying to protect. I do think that some kind of extreme risk protection order or red flag law is incredibly important. I think it's a tool that law enforcement is asking for, like just to, really help prevent. When we talk about mass shootings, for sure, like the Parkland shooting is a perfect example. It could have been prevented. I also think in a lot of domestic abuse and even suicide situations, I think it would help, but we need to be sure it's not weaponized against people of color and Black people and Indigenous people. And so I think it's really important, and we probably need to take a harder look at it, honestly. I do think the tool is necessary and important, but I'm glad to hear you bring that up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what is so fun. Okay, if right now there's like a fun thing about this is that it didn't pass in its form. And so it gives us a little bit of an opportunity to dig into it and really, do what I think we all in our hearts hope it intends to do, but that we really take a bigger look at it especially with the climate in our community and how that's changed in the last year. Liz, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that Alisha and Martha said, and I thank you for that perspective and appreciate that. And I agree with you that there's an opportunity there to take another look at it, and with what Alisha said, if we should be looking at every piece of legislation through a lens of racial equity, and what are the effects on all groups. And I think it goes back to sort of what I mentioned before about, one piece of legislation isn't going to fix the whole issue. And so, in addition to, I think the spirit of the bill is needed, and there should be a way to keep guns out of the hands of those who are a danger to themselves and others. And we need to ensure that there are resources in the community for suicide prevention and domestic abuse and mental health care. And we need to be, taking action on systemic inequities and racism in our criminal justice system and our policing system, like all of the things, right? And so we need to have folks in office who are on board and ready to take action on all of those things. It's not, no one of these things is the answer. We need to be taking action on all of them.
Mm-hmm. And I think, go ahead, Martha.
I was just going to say, but I think what the arguments that I have heard against the red flag laws have not been what you are talking about at all. And so I think that what you are talking about is a much more legitimate concern. And so again, I really think that your voice is needed.
Oh, Martha, I just really appreciate you. See, all those things are so nice. I think, my mind goes to, and then I am going to wrap it up because I tend to be the one that I have to shut myself up. But, I think of like restraining orders. And the thought process behind a restraining order is to protect the victim. I've had to like put restraining orders on people. And in the process, I had to outline where I was going to be every day, the address, the school, what time, basically to tell this person, you can't come find me. You're not supposed to be in these places. And all I was left with was a piece of paper and a map for them to find me. They showed up every time. And so I do think that we just need to dig in a little bit deeper. And I hope that that's what, my life perspective and the things that I've been through can just help us kind of fine tune some of these ideas, take what, the big group is doing. And I hope that that's, the value that I bring to this group, but also to the bigger, house and how we move forward. Well, we're going to start to wrap up just because, again, we want to be really mindful of time. I know that Alisha and Martha have a meeting to get to, and so do I. And I'm sure, Liz, you probably got something going on, right? We're like 50 days away from the general.
49, that's right.
49. Oh, I knew. And you have it, right? You have a dry erase board that has the countdown.
every day I change the numbers. Yes. And early voting starts on Friday. So, yep.
Yeah. Well, Martha, if you want to start just in closing, if there's anything you want to add, and then Alisha will go to you, and then Liz and I will do some candidate updates.
Well, I think one of the reasons that, can you hear me? I think one of the things you wanted me to do was talk about why I am a great supporter of yours. And that is because, well, there are many reasons, but I was just incredibly impressed with you. Actually, the first time you called me, I called Nicole and I said, so you think I should meet Heather Keeler? She gives me your phone number. I call you, you talk to me. You say, well, when can we get together? Well, tomorrow. Okay. So that kind of responsiveness, that you wanted to learn about an issue, that you wanted to hear what I had to say, that's remarkable. And I know that you do that with all your potential constituents, that you want to hear what people have to say, that you have a deep concern for the members of this community, that you bring people together, and that you're so incredibly honest. Also, you just don't quit. I don't know how you do it. I have no idea how you go and go and go the way you do, but boy, oh boy, that would be a thrilling quality to have in a state legislator.
There's a shirt that I saw that I really want to get, and it says, I can't quit. I'm too legit. Okay, Alisha, your turn.
All right. So I support Liz also for many, many reasons. It's really hard for me not to say a swear word, but she gets things done. You're exactly right, Martha. Like, it would be so thrilling to have a leader that just like goes hard. I mean, nobody will outwork her, and probably Heather, it sounds like too. Like, she just gets it done, you know, like there was we realized that, or she realized that Rochester students had a lot of school lunch debt. So she worked on, like, the next day there was a fundraiser and money raised, and like she just gets stuff done and she doesn't wait. She does it right away. And if she doesn't know the answer, she goes to the source and goes to the expert and finds the answer. And anyways, was a smart and hardworking, and she would be an incredible, incredible candidate. And for anybody that's watching, vote and call all your friends, make sure they're voting, call all your neighbors, like have those conversations, because candidates can't be knocking on doors. So it's up to every single one of us to like call all of our people, collect them, and get them to vote. That's it. Thank you for having us tonight, Heather.
Yeah, so Liz, like you said, 49 days away. What are some things that you have going on? Tell us where people can learn more about you, fundraising, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I would just start with a thank you to Heather for including me. This was super fun and a great conversation. And thank you also to Martha and Alisha for joining in. This was really fun. So for more information about me, people can get that at my webpage, which is lizboldon.com. And things we have going on. So you're right, we are not door knocking right now. And so that means lots and lots of phone calls. And so that is what I'm going to be doing next. When we hang up with this, I will be reaching out to voters, which is fantastic. You know, it looks different. We're not at the doors, but we are still able to make connections with voters and have meaningful conversations about what is important to you, what matters to you. And that is one of my favorite things about this, is just getting to know folks across the district and hearing what's important to them. So if you would like to help me make phone calls, there are many opportunities for that. We have phone banks every Tuesday and Thursday evening and Sunday afternoon. And a special plug for this coming Thursday, the 17th, we have a phone bank with an auto dialer, which means the phone calls are much more efficient and we can reach way more people. So if you're only going to phone bank once, Thursday is the day to do it. So you can find the Facebook event on my Facebook page for that. And also, you know, I'm on social media and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and I'm very accessible, and I'm really interested in connecting with folks and reaching out to folks. And I do not have all the answers to how to, you know, everything that needs to be done and exactly the way to do it. But I am open to learning and listening. And so please reach out to me if you have thoughts or questions. I would love to chat with you. So. Thank you.
I feel like we should do a joint phone bank, because then it's like joining forces
Yeah, I
and
would love that.
all the things.
Yep.
Okay.
On it.
Same for me. I'm not door knocking. I have been saying that from the very beginning. My community is something that I really care about. I'm actually, just because I'm trying to save my voice for things, I'm going to pass it over to Nicole, who's my campaign manager. She's going to give you all the details of the things we have going on. Just thank you all for joining. This panel was actually, I love all my panels, but this was great. And thank you for everybody who tuned in. We did have some people over on Facebook that were watching as well. So Nicole, take it away. Panelists, you guys just hang out for a second, please.
Okay, so we have phone banks every Wednesday and Sunday, so I'm gonna put the link in the chat on Zoom, and then I will drop it on the Facebook page as well in a minute. We really need help, as Heather said, she's not door knocking, so we really need help talking to as many voters in Moorhead and Oakport Township as we can, especially because other people are not following the same COVID guidelines as we are. So we really need to get help as much as we can. We are planning a week of action coming up in about a week and a half. We don't have the details out yet, but they're coming soon. So keep an eye on that. We'll have lots of things, extra phone banks and other fun things, and maybe some special guests that are very exciting. I can't talk about it yet, but we're working on it. Next week's Town Hall Tuesday is going to be about cash bail. I don't have that up on Facebook, but it's on my to-do list for tomorrow. And the last thing I wanted to mention was Liz had talked about early voting. I didn't actually tell Heather this. We've talked about 20 times today, and somehow I managed to not tell Heather this part, but I called the Clay County Auditor's office today to find out what their early voting procedures are for the general election, because they were a little bit limited in the primary. And what they told me is they are open to the public only for early voting. So you can't go like pay your taxes in person or whatever else it is that they do over there, but you can just show up and vote. You do not need an appointment. And that is the only thing they are open for. So you can go vote early in person at the Clay County Auditor's office starting on Friday. They're open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And you just show up, and you will have to bring your ID because you're not voting in your precinct location, but then you can vote and get your ballot in. I plan to go on Friday as soon as I possibly can get over there. So everybody go vote as soon as you can. Liz has something to add.
Can I just put in one more plug for all the information on voting, or lots of information on voting? mnvotes.org is a fantastic webpage that has all the information. So that is a good place to go to find out information on voting locations. You can request your ballot, you can track your ballot, mnvotes.org.
It is a great tip. And we have a page on our website, heatherverhouse.com/voting, that also has all those links. So I put that in the chat as well. Heather, anything else we need to cover before we go?
We ended at 7. I love when we do that. We have great conversation. We're efficient with time. Thank you all for coming. Get involved. Bring people to get registered and just vote. It is so, so important. And also, as Liz mentioned earlier, find a Senate race to really invest into so that we can work on flipping the Senate so we can really get some of these things moving. I appreciate you all. Keep doing the great work. Stay healthy, and we'll talk to you all later. Bye.